And welcome to another of our series of virtual artist talks hosted by the Barrett Art Center for some of our national and international juried exhibitions. Tonight we have a selection of artists with us who were selected for our Represent New Portraiture International Juried Exhibition. And they represent some of the artists from around the world who have kind of engaged with the idea of what it means to represent, what it means to take a likeness, and what does portraiture actually have to offer us hundreds of years as a media kind of as a theme of arts representation. So we're going to start tonight with the first of our artists, Charles Eady, who is joining us from Florida tonight, and he will speak about his work in the show, his practice, and then we will open it up to questions from any of you joining us from home, wherever that may be. So I give it to you, Charles.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be a part of this exhibit. My name is Charles Eady. I'm originally from South Carolina, and I now live in Ocala, Florida. So I'm going to go to my screen here. And
so we're just looking for the PowerPoint presentation, correct?
yes. Okay, are you able to see that? Okay. So I'm going to show you some slides of my art, then go into some details and end with my book cover. My first painting in the series was about 10 years ago. I was expecting to find the usual views of the South. However, doing my research, I realized I was finding history that wasn't in the textbooks. After I saw the first census of 1790, for all other free person, there was a column there, and it became apparent this would be a thought-provoking research that I was about to be involved with. So this led me on a paper trail through the archives in South Carolina, the Library of Congress, and tax records and other reliable sources. And I had no idea such official records and documents existed about free Blacks, and that is what my paintings and my art is about. And this changed my view of how I saw the South as I continued to do the research. I realized that education could be used as a catalyst for change. I was learning about a population of people that I didn't know existed. And being in South Carolina, that was quite shocking to me. And before Google, the type of research that I did wouldn't have been possible, because the very first thing I did was to type in just Eady Plantation, South Carolina. I was doing some research for my father, and I was expecting to find a story about bondage, but I found a story that could potentially interrupt history. So then the question became, how was I going to tell the story? And at the time, I was doing two types of art. I was doing impressionistic cotton scenes and jazz scenes that were silk screen. The cotton scenes that I was doing were paintings. So then a title came to me as I was trying to decide how I was going to do what I was about to do, which was Hidden Freedom. And I just happened to have a painting of the cotton next to the silkscreen image that were laying up against the wall. And then as I saw them, I said, that would be interesting if I just combine those two. So then now I had the title, Hidden Freedom, and the type of art that I did. So, and what I was going to do to combine them, as I was deciding to incorporate history with the art. So what you're seeing is a painting that I did that's titled Black Jockey. And the process is a combination of silk screens, oil paintings, acrylics, and inks. When I was coming across the documents, I was trying to decide, like, how could I use this document? Because I was seeing it in black and white, like a black and white sheet of paper. I said, that's good. I've seen that done before where it's just collaged on there, but I wanted it to look more authentic. So I decided that I was going to make paper look old before I actually did the silk screen over it. So now it was a matter of how was I going to make the paper look old? And usually I started going by what I had customarily seen or heard about using tea and coffee. And as I began to look around in the art in my studio, I saw the inks that were there, I saw watercolors that was there, some acrylic mediums that were there. So I kind of started combining and doing what I wanted to do with those mediums. And I was putting it on top of the paper, and it was coming close to how I wanted the paper to look, but it wasn't quite there. And then I decided to just flip the paper over and try it again. But as I flipped it over, it was looking more like what I was expecting it to look like. So then I realized, okay, that's the technique I'm going to use. I'm going to start doing it like that, and then using the back side of the back of the paper. So right here, this says free color person. This is actually a census from 1830, 1840 that's done with the process that I just mentioned. And here, I don't know if you're able to see where my cursor is or not, but here, this is a part of the 1790 census. And the 1790 census was the very first census of America. And this is the census where I saw a column that had all other free persons on it. So that immediately caught my attention because that was a different kind of South than what I had learned about in the textbooks. This document that you see here that's in the white, kind of like in the middle where the horse is, I was fortunate to find this. I was looking through some things and I came across this and I said, I couldn't have found a better piece of document to go with the painting that I'm working on. So after I had all of that, it was a part of just bringing everything together. So the black jockeys, they, like before the races, before the Kentucky Derby, they trained the horses and the horses were more comfortable with them. So when the black jockeys rode the horses, they rode faster. So this is why for the very first Kentucky Derby in 1875, there were, out of the 15, there were 13 who were black. And then in 1875, Oliver Lewis, he was the winner, and he was a black jockey. Okay, so now I'm going to go to this one, slightly mixed. And I actually took this title from a historian who did an article that was titled Slightly Mixed. And I would spell it differently for a while, but then I went back to its original spelling. I didn't know if I was infringing on what she had or not, if it was that way. But it was just such a good title that, and it went with the painting. I just decided this is what I'm going to use here. So along here, this is a census handwritten from 1790. And there's a column that's off to the right that shows the names for all other free persons. Now, what got my attention a lot about this is that the surname, there's a surname on here that has Eady. So I am seeing this document for the first time, and I'm wondering if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing, because all of this is new information to me, and I didn't know anything about it. So as I continued my research, I said, okay, I'm going to have 3 reliable sources, something like archives, something from the Library of Congress, some actual documents, and I continued on that path for the entire research. This is a map of St. John's Parish where this document of the census was actually taken, and you can still see where I'm using the impressionistic cotton scenes. And I decided that I was going to use a younger person on here to show some research that Paul Henning did, where he discovered that with the mixed race, a lot of mixed race children during that time were a result of the slaves and indentured servants who worked in the field together, and they were side by side, and they had eventually began to have children together. Okay. So now this, in the research with Denmark, with Virginia DeMarcy, the one where I got the title from, she coined a term that was called triracial groups. And they were generally like Blacks, Indians, and whites that lived in certain areas. And they were given names such as brass ankles, red bones, and caramel Indians. So this is one of the places where one of those names would have fit, because they were called brass ankles in this area. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to my next slide. Now this is Anna, and she caught the attention of my mind before I started doing a painting about her. As I began my paintings, somewhere in there, me doing the paintings, because I never thought anything could actually pull me away from the paintings. But as I was doing the research and I started doing a few shows, people started saying, you know, maybe I should write a book. So then I started looking for somebody to write the book, but then I kept hearing, you should write the book. So as I began to write the book, it began to flow, because at that point I had already spent so much research that the characters had already developed in my mind. And I wanted to know how Anna would look with a painting. And as I mentioned also, I did jazz scenes. That's why there's a combination of styles that's here. And there was one jazz painting that I did that had the lady's arm folded like Anna's is. So I decided to go with that. I just liked how that was, because there was a part in the book that says Anna shrugged, because she wanted to learn how to read. And I also wanted to show that a different perspective of how a slave may look, some of the aspirations of the slave, because she wanted to read. So I wanted to bring that out. Okay, here's a slave that wanted to read. And she actually sought the help to learn how to read from a free Black who was a boy who would visit her on Sundays, which sounded unusual to me, because I didn't know that type of thing happened during that time. But on Sunday afternoon, visitations were allowed. So over a period of time, she learned how to read. And as far as how she looked, it went with how I saw it, you know, in my mind. Other than the hair also, but the hair is tied into a particular style, because I did a DNA test and find out that I was about 50% Bantu, and her hairstyle, parts of it has what is called Bantu knots. Now, originally, I wanted the entire hair to look that way, but as I began to work on the painting, it took a different turn. And as an artist, you kind of learn over a period of time to follow the painting. So I ended up with this hairstyle. Okay. So now I'm going to go to my next slide. Now this one was unusual, an unusual start because the title came before the painting. Usually I'll do a painting and then I'm struggling trying to come up with a name for it. So after I started thinking about afros and some of the things that I learned from my research, how they're a lot unlike some things we may have thought they were, because it's basically thought that the afros in America started in the 70s, which they very well could have, but not definitely. So I didn't put a lot of research into that aspect of it yet, but the title I like because I knew that the banjos were invented in Africa. So I wanted to show her holding it, and I wanted to present the question, you know, did slaves have afros then? Because they used certain types of grease that came from animal fats, I know, to condition and work with their hair and to kind of use the products, probably like the products are made today, but just in a more raw sense of how they used them then, because they had ways of taking care of their hair. Now, one of the things that I discovered was how like bold the free blacks were with their rights. So now I'm discovering that not only were they there, but there was a certain amount of boldness that they had as citizens, because taxes were imposed against them, but they would go to court because of the taxes being imposed on them and say, no, we don't think we should be paying this tax. And so that's two new things, that they were bold, that they went to court, and there are records, and I show a lot of this in the book that I wrote, but there are records that show where they made the petitions to the court that this tax, we don't feel like we should be paying. Now, they also formed different organizations to educate themselves. Now, once again, this is all information that I did not know existed before I began my research. So I'm going to show, this is just a photo of me in the studio where I do my paintings. And this is the cover for my book. Now, originally it was Hidden Freedom, but I decided that I wanted to include the different kinds and time periods of the South before the Civil War and after the Civil War. So my book pretty much deals before the Civil War, and a lot of the South as we know it, or how we think about it when we think about the laws and different conditions and rights, actually began after the Civil War, when different laws called the Jim Crow laws were beginning to be imposed. So I wanted to make that distinction there. So in the future, what I have going on is Anna will soon be in an exhibit called Art Fields, and it's one of the biggest art events in the Southeast. That's happening real soon. In fact, I'll be shipping the painting off tomorrow, and it begins in April. And I was in recent talks with the Appleton Museum for an educational exhibit to cover some of the topics that I have in my artwork. So that pretty much covers what I do.
Wow, thank you so much, Charles. This journey that you've taken us on through your journeying into the historical documents and also into, you know, the aesthetics that you're kind of putting forth with the way you're depicting your characters and the history and these stories. and giving a voice to these stories that you're discovering. I have a question about what's actually right behind you, and I'm wondering if that's any part of your new work or a different part of your body of work, just to ask, because I'm curious.
Yeah, it became a new style after I did the one with Anna and I got some responses from that. Then I started doing more of the portrait type scenes that would include different characters from there. There is one that is holding what appears to be a book, and that book has tax records in it. And to actually see the painting, you can actually see where the text are saying the original copy of the tax books and how that looked. And then the other one, it was discovered in Charleston where the free blacks actually had porcelain in an area where they live. So I decided to include that in one of my paintings.
Wow, as a student of material culture, I would say that's a really interesting, a bit of knowledge that you can gain from all sorts of different kinds of historical evidence. And I love the way that you've kind of made this an interdisciplinary practice for yourself here. And I just am really excited to see what happens next. And can you mention the name of the art exhibition that'll be going on in the Southeast, just for everybody?
Yes, that one is called Art Fields, and it's in Lake City, South Carolina. And it's awesome. A 9-day event.
That's amazing. Well, I hope for people who are down in that area that they get a chance to visit. And I'm just really excited to have learned a lot tonight. So thank you. And I think what we're going to do right now is move up the East Coast to our next artist. And then at the end, we'll circle back with everybody. But I would like to introduce Ashley Catharine Smith, who's joining us from Philadelphia. And if we can unshare this screen, then I think awesome. Then Ashley will bring us into what she's got prepared for us tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, great. You all can see that? Okay, great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So thank you for having me. I actually got a chance to see the show like 2 weekends ago and when it opened, which was really cool. So I was happy to get the chance to go see it. So what I am going to share tonight is some pieces from like 2 different bodies of work, and then also some process shots of some newer things that I've been working on, just to kind of see, because I live like mostly in the realm of photography. So sometimes that is the mixed media work is like an interesting addition to that. So I'm going to talk a little about the process behind actually making these pieces. So a lot of my work combines photography mostly. So I start any of these pieces with images that I've taken, and then I embroider and use different types of, mostly embroidery, like beading. And lately I've been getting into weaving and some other kind of expanding as far as fiber goes. But most of my pieces are embroidered photographs. So this is from a series called This Is How We Spend Time Together These Days. And that's what this piece is titled as well. And this was one of the first photographs that I worked on embellishing. So this is embellished with sequins and beads. So in a lot of the work, I use the embroidery to kind of cover things up in the photograph, embellish important parts of the photograph, change things that I don't like in the photograph if I wasn't able to get it how I wanted it the first time, which I found has been something I do more and more of. It almost feels a little bit like cheating, but this is a piece, and these are relatively small. They're like 16 inches by 16 inches, this one. This is a piece called Call Boys by a Wrong Name to Remind Them How Unimportant They Are, which I was thinking about what Charles was saying about titles. A lot of the titles that I end up using, I pull from like Twitter or whatever is happening on social media whenever I see something that I think is kind of strange or funny, I usually write it down and then I end up picking them for titles for my pieces. So this one was embroidered to kind of create an illusion of hair. There's a lot of things that have to do with like male-female relationships and gender, sexual relationships, interpersonal relationships that come up in my work too. And that's purposeful, the differences between how like men and women are depicted in the photographs and then embellished. So this is a piece called No Gods, No Boyfriends that's embroidered with French knots. So this is a smaller piece. It's like 12 inches by 12 inches, but each of these are little knots that are embroidered onto the tongue to create a texture. And I think a lot about like texture of hair or texture of skin, which makes sense because to me, because the pieces are more tactile and they're like not more tactile than any other really type of art, but they're more tactile than straight photography, which is like where I'm thinking, or what I'm thinking about most of the time, or I'm coming from a place of thinking about that more. And the way that I'm able to do, like especially one, like this piece where the embroidery is a little bit more intricate, is I am not able to do it on straight photo paper, even though everything's printed on photo paper. And then I have to mount it to foam core. So in order to embroider into the photographs with a design, I'll mount it to like a 1/4 inch piece of foam core, which just makes the process longer. So I have to poke the holes to embroider with a thicker needle and then go through them with a thinner needle. So I work in sections that are probably like this, like that big at a time, poke all the holes, make the design, and then move on to the next piece. So certain ones take a lot longer than others, but they all take a pretty long time. Some of these photographs are also, when I was working on this body of work, I was thinking a lot about performance and like 70s feminist performance art and things, and the photographs and videos as a document of performance. So some of these that are less kind of direct, the photographs about what they're about, they are photographs that are a document of a performance that may or may not have a video to go with them or something like that. This one in particular had a video to go with it where I was sewing someone's hair into my leg, which is what's happening in the top of the leg there. I don't have any videos on this. These end up being more of like the finished pieces, and the videos are often a way to get there. Not always displayed with the pieces. And then this one is a mix of being embroidered, and then I also screwed in like chunks of embroidery thread, which there's actually all underneath of this that's hanging down. There's screws in it. You can't see it when it's all when it was all finished. So I guess I didn't have to do it that way, but that's part of the piece as well. And then this one was beaded under here where the light was. So the photograph is a photograph of the light that's being emitted from this lamp, but then I tried to kind of add the beading to it to make it seem like it was really kind of like illuminating off of the page or off of the paper. So I think this is the last piece from that project. So they're all kind of meant to function together as if you were putting together a body. I was thinking about it as in the same way that I would put together a body of photographs or photography work. And then I made a shift, and this is the body of work that the piece at Barrett is from. It's called Milky. And in this, I shifted from thinking about relationships and intimacy and kind of gender in that way in my work, as in with relationships, which was really my focus at that point, to more self-portraits and kind of seeing what I could do with portraits of myself, what themes came up for me. I didn't necessarily have as clear cut of an idea of what I wanted to do, but I kind of wanted to see, like, when left to my own devices, what am I thinking about? What do these pictures, well, I'm always left to my own devices, but when I'm just working with myself and I'm not thinking about another person or my relationship to that other person impacting the photographs, what am I coming up with? What are some of the things that I'm thinking about right now that I don't know that I'm thinking about? And that tends to be the way that I work a lot of the time, is just intuitively until I can figure out what it is that's happening. And then I try to streamline it a little bit more. So these are self-portraits that are, beaded or embellished with thread, just interacting with different spaces that I found myself in. This is a shot. This is the piece that's at Barrett right now, which is just a picture from the ocean. That's then kind of, I was trying to embellish the seaweed and make it more textural. And then a shift that I started to make a little bit that I noticed with some of these later pieces is I was doing more adding on to the image, almost making kind of like surreal or a new little world out of what I was working with. Like this piece with the hydrangeas, there's hydrangeas right above me, and then the ones that go up are embellished, kind of created in this way that looks like it couldn't really happen, but it's kind of hard to tell where the real parts of the photograph stop and the made up stuff starts, if you're not looking at it super closely, at least. So these hydrangeas were done with French knots. And I'm also saying new to embroidery. I at this point, I'm always learning new stuff about embroidery. So also if I find out a new technique or something, like making these, they're called lazy daisies, was exciting to me. Learning how to do those things and then incorporating them into the photographs, or taking photographs that I can practice a new technique on. So I'm always learning with that. This is I have a couple images of the process for this piece. So this is the most recent thing that I have kind of out in the world that I finished recently. And it's called Love Bites. And it's made with, so it's a shift away from photography, but it still started with video. It's made with Wonderflex, which is like thermoplastic composite sheets. So they're these really thin pieces of plastic that is actually used a lot in making costumes for cosplay and things like that, because you can heat it up and it becomes, you're able to mold it once you heat it up. It sticks to itself and then it dries hard. So it's very light because it's very thin, but it allowed me to kind of make these sculptures from it. So the pieces from a video that I had where there were these like bite marks on skin, which I projected into the space or onto the wall, that's behind me actually, and then drew out the forms from that video projection of what was happening in the skin. So it's like, process-wise, it's similar to my other work. It looks like a different, doesn't involve the actual photograph. So I drew it out and then molded the shapes with the Wonderflex, which is white, and was able to make these shapes to kind of form on the wall in the spaces where I was able to draw out the outline from that video. And then painted them. So I've been dabbling with painting, which is hard. And then added some crochet. So I wanted them to kind of resemble mouths still, which is why I added the white and different like off-white crocheted parts. And then up in the space, this is where I had it. So they're kind of large. You can move them around. So that was something different for me that I was working on recently. And then the last thing I had was just a couple pictures that I took last week that I don't know what I'm going to do with yet, but I'm thinking of kind of taking it back to what I was working with before, pictures of myself. And this is another picture of my partner. And yeah, so if anyone has any ideas, you can let me know. And that's all. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thanks for getting us like right up to date with where you currently are in your practice, which actually makes me think a little bit about what the last year has been like and this kind of what time has done. And I'm just thinking about how you think about if the last year has changed your practice in any way in terms of really shifting from, not that your work wasn't more than two-dimensional before, but this new, if that has anything to do with it, and in being in these interior, quiet, domestic spaces of home, like that's where we're all stuck. And just how that relates to embroidery and this new practice. I'm just trying to figure out materials and the time.
I think for me, something that, definitely something that the past year has changed is that I think my work is so like me centric, obviously, like pictures of me, and it just felt really pointless at some points for sure. Like how much of I just run through the phase, like how much of this is important and why am I, because I was thinking about so many other things and all these bad things are happening to so many people. And it made me kind of think about why, like I need to be making stuff because it makes me feel like healthy and good and myself. And more of the experimentation with new stuff became important, with new materials, I think became important because it became less about, it felt like it was becoming less about showing what I was experiencing and more about just the process of like what helps me get through life, I guess, for lack of a better word. So yeah.
No, I hear that. I was kind of feeling that something about that coming through, and just also thinking about the amount of time that your process takes in terms of adding the foam core and the actual tactile. Like you must have the most amazing fingers for doing all of that work all the time. Do you have a costume background?
No. And I will say I started trying to learn guitar recently and then keep my nails really short and it's much harder to embroider. So I'm a little bit worried about that as I get kind of back into the embroidery aspect. But I think part of the time of embroidering when I first started doing it was I was obsessed with the images. I was like turning over these images because they had to do with specific people that I wasn't around anymore, or like experiencing loss of relationships. And I really wanted to just be with those images in this way that was very compulsive. And now I think I'm kind of, when I think about making one, I'm kind of like, ugh. The time process seems a little bit more daunting. So I wanted to change it up and do something that like, at least there was some immediate progress as I worked on it. Like first step was molding and then painting and then crochet, not like I get done this much in a day.
Yeah, that goes well.
Yeah. At the time that I started doing it and like I found that process, it was really like fun and necessary, but that part of it has gotten a little bit tiring at times.
I'm sure people can identify with that. So thank you for sharing that part about your evolution. So we're going to actually move now up to Rhode Island from Philly, and we're going to talk to Gunnar Norquist, who is going to share his screen in just a moment, and we'll get started on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to have been included in the show, and very excited to have a short time to share some of my other work tonight, to talk about work that's in the show. So thank you, Joanna and Trish, and thank you to Hannah Turpin as well, the juror, I think, for selecting all of our work. I'm excited to be hearing about all of your work as well tonight, since I haven't had a chance to see the show yet. So my name's Gunnar Norquist. I'm actually Andrew Gunnar Norquist. Gunnar's my middle name, but I go by Gunnar as an artist, and just because I think it's a great name. So I love the name. I live in Providence, as Joanna said. I went to grad school out here, but I'm originally from Minneapolis, in Minnesota. I grew up there my whole life, and went to an undergrad college there as well, and still have family back there in the area. So, but moved out here in 2004 for grad school, and since then, lived out here. I think officially I can call myself a Rhode Islander at this point. So, all right, so let's move through some of these slides. This is the work that's in the show. As I go through the slides, you'll have to use your imagination a little bit for scale purposes, because these are all graphite drawings. But they're quite large. So I will actually intersperse some photos of me and others next to the drawings, just so people have a little better sense for scale. I wanted to talk about this one for a few minutes, because this is the one that's in the show, and then I'll go a little bit quicker through some of the other slides. I do work in other ways. I have an MFA in sculpture, so 3D is actually my bread and butter. But since grad school, I've been working a lot more two-dimensionally. This one was inspired because, so I grew up, as I said, I grew up in Minneapolis. It was actually Western Wisconsin, right over the river. And the exit off of 94, Highway 94, is the big freeway that goes through Minneapolis. The exit off 94, where we would get off, it was kind of a rural exit, and there was a truck stop there. So I grew up with, being sandwiched between trucks. Whenever we got on or off the freeway, there were just many, many trucks. Sometimes there'd be 8 or 10 or 12 just within eyesight. And I still remember driving on the freeway and having the trucks pass you and kind of like push you, like the air almost would push you over a little bit. So there was this just kind of ever present, there was this presence of big trucks all over the place. And I remember getting off the exits and passing the truck stop and seeing and feeling like those truckers are sort of a different breed. There's a little bit of a mythology about them. They're on the road for weeks on end. Who are these folks? And what does it take to want to hit the road for that long? Sometimes being away from family for months at a time, or months out of the year, and just kind of feeling like there's a grit to that kind of lifestyle. There's a tenacity that you kind of need to have for that. And this image specifically was inspired because my mom went through some pretty intense personal traumas a few years back. And I wanted to connect, the tenacity that I saw her kind of like clinging to hope, clinging to life, to a desire to keep living, to keep experiencing joy and happiness and fulfillment in spite of and around those difficulties. Kind of reminded me of like this, it connected in my mind in some way to this sort of mythological figure from my observations as a kid, and decided I wanted to put her in this. So this is my mom. You'll see her in the next photo. There she is, next to the image. And when I present the photo, it's called Road Queen, or when I present the drawing rather, it's called Road Queen. So it's not it's not evident that it's my mom, but in this context, I wanted to tell that story because it seems like an important component to seeing it and sort of knowing kind of what was going on in my mind with it. And yeah, so you kind of get a sense for scale there. And maybe we can talk about that later too, this drawing further if there are any questions about it, but I'm going to keep moving. I work, I guess just to back up a little bit, in general, as an artist, I'm interested in things like personal identity, group identity, the contrast and the interplay between those things, biography. I'm interested in people's stories and how we build our own narratives as people and how we build narratives about other people, social constructs. And so this kind of show about portraiture really lends itself to the kinds of things I'm interested in that way. This one is actually a commission, and it is biographical as well. The gentleman who commissioned it had an experience where he was riding on a camel and it threw him off, and he was near death for several weeks. And coming back from that, he sees the camel sort of as his spirit animal in a way. I think he kind of sees it as this pivotal moment in his life. He made some very big changes in his life after that. And so this is another one that I did. This is a scale picture of me working on it when it was halfway done. This is one which you can actually see behind me, which it was commissioned by the same gentleman. This one I'm exploring, kind of community, group dynamics. This is sort of portraying a tavern space where people go to share a drink, talk, relax together. There's music, live music there. And in some ways it feels a little indulgent because these are all the things I love most. I love hanging out, especially during COVID, right? When we have experienced, so many people have experienced such isolation. This just felt like, none of these people wearing masks, none of, they're kind of like all up in each other's face. No one is social distancing. It just felt a little bit like, I'm going to pack as many people in here as I can, and they're all going to be drinking and, and enjoying each other's company, enjoying the music. And this one's very large as well. Here's an image of that. This image actually is a little bit deceiving. It's over 8.5 feet long, wide. So it actually doesn't even look like that from here, but it's, you can take my word for it. It's big. And I was just gonna say, sort of, Ashley, you were talking a little bit about, getting this much work done in a day. That's how I feel with some of these drawings, because they're, it's, work on this guy's vest. And I think that took me a day. Like, it was, and I'd stand back at the end of the day and think, in some ways, you kind of feel a little discouraged, I guess. Of course, after it's done, it feels really satisfying, but I think last time I calculated about 150 hours on this one, maybe. So it's a big undertaking. But I also wanted to point out, I don't know if any of you noticed, but the fellow who commissioned the camel drawing commissioned this one and wanted me to include a drawing of the camel in this drawing. I thought was very meta and kind of neat. All right, so this one is actually the first of the large drawings that I did. This is the very first time I did a big drawing. This one, that's me next to it. And it is in some ways sort of a self-portrait of me as an old man, just kind of exploring, again, maybe a little indulgent in a way, I guess, sort of who I want to be, I guess, when I'm older. I'm an outdoorsman. I like being outside. I like to hike, and I travel. In fact, I'm going up to the White Mountains with some friends in a couple of days for the weekend, and we're going to be hiking, going up mountains, and I don't want to stop. I want to keep doing that. So this was a little bit of me exploring who I hope to be in 30 or 40 years, I suppose. It's called The Hiker. That's the Lowe's Trail and Mount Madison is an actual trail intersection in the Presidential Range in New Hampshire. And this is the last slide that I'm going to share. This is actually the second one that I did in that series, where I was kind of like portraying who maybe I could be in 30 or 40 years. In addition to caring about the outdoors, I also read a lot, and just love to expose myself to new ideas and new authors and new voices. So in some ways, this felt like kind of like, yes, a future self-portrait of me, but maybe even more so maybe the idea of self-portrait through the ideas that you consume. So these are all books that are in my library. I sort of rendered each book title so that you could, when you're standing in front of it, you can read the titles. If you were to stand in front of it and read through the titles, you would find quite a wide array. So there's psychology and history and religion and popular fiction. I think there's like a systematic theology right next to the Hunger Games. It's like these contrasting things. And I also sort of took a little bit of a nod from kind of some historical tropes. So I added the skull as kind of a symbol of mortality and kind of frailty of life. I added a sculpture kind of bookend of the thinker, but maybe that thinker had toppled off the shelf at one point. Take that for what you think it might mean or might not mean, but I think that's it. I would love to field any questions now or once we have a chance to hear from Nayana as well.
Well, thank you so much. I like that you end with this up close kind of image of yourself. I actually just want to push a little bit on the notion that self-portraiture is indulgent, or that your work is indulgent. I just want to hear you talk more about it, because I think it's worthwhile to explore. I mean, you are the expert on you. So yes. Like in a way, you're the best and have the most experience in being able to portray this. So I just want to hear more from you on that.
Yeah, so I'm guessing the question has to do with why do I choose that word, indulgent?
I think so, or what, in the same way that these books are signifiers of certain things, like the indulgent has a certain set of like kind of connotations around it.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's multiple reasons I might use that word. But I think the main one is these feel like fun works to work on and not very self-critical. So for example, like if you went through this, like these particular books, you might find, there just tend to be books that either are a personal favorite of mine, or at least had some kind of like enjoyment factor, whether or not it's something that I like just in the consuming of it, whether or not it was something that I, if it was an idea that I actually adopted or agreed with in the end. that in the very least was meaningful to me in a personal way. And so I guess in some ways it feels indulgent because maybe a little bit like what Ashley was talking about, it's just sort of about me and like my preferences and my perspective on the world, and not very self-critical in some ways.
So thank you for, yeah, I think I take you at your word, but that's what you're doing here. And at the end, I would like to see if anyone has any ways that they want to speak about the Road Queen image, because I also think there's lots to talk about there as well. But for now, I thank you. And I think we will move on to Nayana, who is joining us from just up the road a little bit in Athol, Massachusetts.
I'm about 2 hours actually from Gunnar. So I will share my screen. So I am Nayana LaFond. I live in central Massachusetts. I've been a painter all my life, but I prefer to say just I'm an artist because I like to dabble in really anything that kind of strikes my fancy or I feel like might express whatever I'm feeling at that moment. I started in school as a photography major, specifically black and white old process, large cameras on large pieces of film and lots of chemicals. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. But I also really missed the physical process of applying paint to a surface and the meditative process that was in that. So it just drew me back to it. So I started doing a lot of work that involved some of the aspects that I loved about photography with the black and white specifically. So most of my work has a very strong black and white element to it. The current project that I'm working on, which this is the piece that is in the show for, it's part of a larger project. This is Kimberly. This piece is 30 by 40, so it's quite large. There's a photo at the end where I'm in my studio where I have a lot of scale. And all my work has been about processing experiences in life and specifically trauma. So I was I was quarantined at home. I had done a whole series of work about COVID, which I will get to images of, and I kind of felt like I had done that subject already. I'd gotten some really interesting opportunities out of it in shows, and some of the pieces were on a billboard, and that was really exciting. And I felt like, I've kind of done that, and I went back to my roots of processing trauma. And I had had some traumatic experiences with domestic violence, so I chose to do one piece about the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement, of which I am Anishinaabe, Abenaki, and Mi'kmaq, as well as French and German. So I did one piece about it on May 5th, 2020, as just a way to process it and to acknowledge the intergenerational trauma and what that had to do with it, and just process my own emotions. And I shared it to a group on Facebook called Social Distance Powwow. And I went to bed. And I woke up the next morning and there was over 6,000 reactions, inbox messages, people saying, "Can you paint me? Can you do this? Can you do that?" And I said, "I'll do a couple more." And between May 5th, 2020 and now, I've done 45 so far. And I decided early that I was just going to paint whoever sent me them. And I wasn't going to pick and choose, because how do you say no to someone who's trying to remember a loved one who unfortunately didn't make it out of their situation? So I decided I'll just paint them all, not knowing what I was in for. So I put out kind of an open call to the group and said, "Hey, anybody want me to do theirs as well? I might as well. I kind of done with the COVID subject. I don't want to paint that anymore. Give me something to paint. I'm quarantined." And I got 25 submissions the first day with stories and photos. And so I kind of took it on. and I'm averaging anywhere from 1 to 5 paintings per week, and they're all large. Kimberly here took 3 days to paint. So when all of you are saying, oh, it's this small thing, I kind of work a little differently. I work really quickly. So this is Kimberly, she's 30 by 40. And here's 4 of them lined up at the Emerson Center in Bozeman, Montana, where there's 13 of them right now. Kimberly, of course, was sent to you guys. And that show was actually purchased and is going on tour all over North America for the next 3 years. So I'm really excited that that's going to raise awareness about the subject. It started as therapy, and it turned into kind of artivism. I chose to make it a not-for-profit personally for me. If I sell any of them, I've been donating it to charity, although I haven't sold any originals by choice, because I've made it a mission of mine to exhibit them as many places as possible to raise awareness about the issue. Indigenous people are, I believe it's 1 in 3 are victims of sexual violence. 98% of Indigenous people experience physical violence in their lifetime, and the prosecution rate is only 6%. And it's happening constantly around us. I painted 2 sisters a couple weeks ago. One was murdered in 2018 by her boyfriend, and the other in 2020 by her boyfriend. So it kind of turned into a whole thing and took on a life of its own. And each person's a real person and sends me their story and gives me permission to paint them and to share their story. And people started asking for prints, so I allowed those available. But again, I'm taking that money and just putting it back into it because I feel like these are people's lives. So it's become a labor of love project. This is the one I just finished this week. She's 36 by 48. And I painted her in 6 hours in one session. And Rain, Jalen is an activist as well. She lost her aunt. Josie is from California. She's also an activist who has lost family members. Rosalie is a famous athlete who ran with the handprint on her mouth to raise awareness, and Rosalie gave me permission to paint her, and she's been working with me to kind of spread the word. Stacy as well. Little Fox. And then this is my past work. So I'll go back for a second. So this project, again, I didn't intend it to be a project, but it became one. So I don't know how long it's going to go, but maybe I'll complete a full year. Maybe I'll continue it past that, but I don't feel like it's done yet. It's one of those art things where you feel your way through, and when it's done, I guess I'll know it's done. I'm finally getting some male submissions because it is not just a female issue. So I'm happy that I'm going to be starting painting some men as well. And then before it, this is kind of my past work. I did a lot of abstraction, taking that idea of the black and white photography and the work that I did in that and abstracting it and pulling out certain forms and making them clearer and crisper and trying to express feelings and emotions that I had experienced living in a city environment, but feeling alone in a crowd and fading. And then at one point I decided that I was going to give myself a headache and took on this project mostly just because I wanted to see if I could do it, and I wanted to push myself. And then when I could do it, I thought, okay, what is this expressing? So I started using it as a mechanism to express feelings that I couldn't put out there into the world at that time. I was going through a lot of difficult life experiences. I had leukemia and a bone marrow transplant and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I take it out on the work. And that's kind of the running theme of all of my work, because for me, it's about the process of it. It's less about what happens to it after. Of course, with the Artivism stuff, I want it to go on and do something. But I would be making work regardless of if anyone saw it or if it even said anything, because it's about the therapy for me and it's about the process. This piece is obviously I voted. It's my friend Samantha that actually it won Best in Show at the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which was actually in Rhode Island in Warwick. So that was right before the pandemic. This is one that I did. It's done with actually silver paint because I wanted to mimic the sensation of being in the hospital and surrounded by all the medical and the metallic and the sense of sterilization. I spent a cumulative 16 months in an isolation room in the hospital with a bone marrow transplant and complications from it. So I stayed sane with paint in my room, very literally, canvases and paint in my room. So I painted a whole series based from that and processing those emotions. And it's a lot, it's very different than what I'm doing now, because what I'm doing now is a lot more realistic. And with this, it was more about the feeling and the sensation. And when you're in those environments, it becomes blurred, and PTSD and all of those things kind of come into play. I've also done quite a bit of activism art. Things happen, and because of my immune system, I can't just go to the protest myself. So this has kind of been my way of participating, having my voice heard along with everyone else's. So this is my friend Amira Nation is her name, which is a fantastic name. And this was a protest in Southampton, New York. And then this one is, again, I was doing all of that medical art already, kind of when COVID happened. I'd been wearing masks for years, and I'd already been in those environments, and I already had this great appreciation for the medical workers. And so when COVID hit and I was stuck at home with nothing but art supplies, which wasn't that strange for me or that uncomfortable, because I'd already spent that 16 months in an isolation. So for me, it was like, okay, make more art, I guess. And so through COVID, between the MMIW project and the COVID work and other pieces, I've painted over 75 paintings since like April 2020. So this is another one. This one was specifically about COVID and the healthcare workers. And the blue I chose to highlight, which is something that I do in a lot. I pick specific things, like with the MMIWG work back here. The reason that red is the only color that you see is because in Native cultures, they believe that red is the only color spirits can see. So in this, it represents that this is the way a spirit would see her. In this piece, it's about fading away and us kind of fading and becoming kind of muddy down versions of ourselves and lost in the crowd and alone. In this, obviously, it's just like trying to just bring your attention right to that point. And in this one specifically, it was about that color. It's my least favorite color, and it's a very nice color. A lot of people like that color. It's my least favorite color because of the PTSD I have associated with the color. So I don't even allow that color in my house, but I put it in the paintings because it takes it out of myself and it puts it there, and then I can leave it there. So I made this piece, and it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. This piece was on a 40-foot billboard outside the Plaza Hotel in New York City for summer and fall of 2020. Thanking healthcare workers, along with 2 other pieces that I made from that same series. I tend to work in series because of the idea of working through an idea, kind of doing as many versions of it as possible, working it out like therapy, because it is therapy for me. Here's one of the COVID pieces that I did. I ended up going on Facebook and painting all of my friends. I just said, send me your picture with your mask and I'll paint you because I need something to paint. I just need something to do. And so I painted, I don't even know how many mask portraits at this point. This is my friend's son. And I just sent them to them because what am I going to do, right? Bring some happiness, I guess. And I was live streaming all of them as well. And I also live stream all of my work. And then this is my studio, and you can see the scale of the pieces from it. I think that's the end. So I'll go back to the beginning. I also, aside from this, I work with textiles as well. I have stretched canvases where I suspend them in the middle of a frame using quilting thread. I also encapsulate medical supplies and expired medication that I no longer take in epoxy forms, and I'm building an installation piece with that also. So I don't like limiting myself with mediums. I never thought I would be a portrait painter. Never. I absolutely didn't even cross my mind, but this project presented itself and I said, okay. So that's kind of the way that I operate with art in general. I let whatever is guiding me guide me, and it's certainly not me trying to express like a specific thing or call it, you know, it's not an intentional thing. It's just that's where I'm guided at that moment, so I do that, and then at some point I will feel like I need to do some other project, and then I'll do that. But this is what I'm working on right now, and I'm really glad with the response that I'm getting. Some of the pieces have gone viral, and that's good because it's raising awareness. So if you have any questions, you'd ask.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and what this means to you, as you know, your process means, and it really helps me understand this one image in the context of what you do and your work. So thank you for your work.
And on a side note, Kimberly is a total badass. She is a really awesome person, and she rides her motorcycle around North America raising awareness, and she's a competitive jingle dancer, which the jingle dance is for healing. So when you see someone wearing the red jingle dance, they're specifically doing it for healing for the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement.
So we do have a question from someone who actually wants to know what the red hand means. I'll let you handle that.
Yep, it is the symbol for the missing and murdered Indigenous people movement, which is a movement to raise awareness about the problem in North America, which covers all of North America and Canada. It's even bigger problem in Canada. It's known as the Canadian genocide, where Indigenous women and girls and children, and also men, which is a lesser known thing, but it's also an issue with men, go missing. They are found murdered, and often it's not prosecuted, it's not followed up on. There's a lot of issues with lack of communication between the officials on reservations and off in cities as well. There's a general attitude of, it's just another Indian gone, why should we bother? There was one girl I painted who was 22 and found murdered back in May of 2020. And her fiance, who murdered her and did so very brutally, was only charged with manslaughter on Indian territory, which is almost a laughable charge, considering, I won't get into the details because they're gruesome, but that's what the red handprint is about. It's about raising awareness about it. It's also specifically about the silenced and about calling the dead home. That's why it's red, because the dead only can see red.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So I think we're kind of at the point where we can entertain questions about all of the...
I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. We can entertain questions for all of the artists. I actually do have a question that came up for Gunnar about using your black frames, and if that's about setting up value.
No, actually the frames, because of how large the drawings are, I don't have a space, a flat wall big enough to roll that paper out on. So I build the frames first. I don't know if you can notice, but this frame actually goes over my window frame. Like because my wall isn't big enough to have the page rolled out on it to do the drawing on. So I build the frames first and actually kind of pre-frame the page and then work on the drawing in the frame so that I have a flat surface to draw against. So it's really just pragmatic. So.
So do any of you have any questions for each other? Because I can ask one or two more, but I'm actually struck by, there's two things. Nayana, you were speaking about how much you were producing and how quickly, in 6 hours of those paintings, and the slowness of the other practice. And I just, that really strikes me as this interesting different, it's not just the medium, but also, even though they're taking different amounts of time, you both talk about the meditative or the therapeutic, or like the way that this is feeding each of you as an artist to do this representation. And I just found that it could be slow, it could be fast, but that
Yeah, it doesn't make it any better or worse.
Right.
It's just the process that you go through.
Yeah.
And I didn't used to be this fast. It's just I think it's just that sometimes it comes out like a wave and sometimes you're very lost in it, and it's equally valuable.
Yeah, right. So it's just that through line there is that it's about the actual doing as much as what you end up with. So, and even with you, Charles, thinking about all of the research, like all of the time and the discovery that it takes to then come to where you are now with this production of what you're producing is just what it needed to be. And it's just what it needs to be for each of you at the time that you need it to be that, which is inspiring. And I thank you all for speaking and sharing with us tonight. Oh, we do have a question. Charles, have you always been a painter?
Oh, yes. I started with drawing. I had an older brother who drew a lot, and that kind of inspired me when I was young to draw. And later on, I think when I got to college, actually was when I actually started painting. But until then, it was mostly graphite drawings that I did. And after taking a painting class, I had a very good instructor who kind of taught the basics of painting, and that kind of launched me on to do some things on my side of painting.
Nice. I enjoy hearing that progression. And for you, Ashley, this is from another artist who's actually in the show, who is asking, I find in LGBTQ art, gay men often use embroidery to comment on gender assumptions. I'm curious if you see your use of embroidery as part of the conversation on gender in your pieces.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And when I started, I've read like, I don't do a lot, like we were talking about Charles's research on things, but I have looked into a lot of like the history of textiles, and I have a really good book called Queer Threads that has all of these different like textile pieces that I look at a lot. And what I was started off thinking about with the work was about like the history of women and textiles. And for me, it was a way of, like we talked about, this like meditative or therapeutic process. And that being really like gendered as something that historically women did. And then the more that I kind of worked on that, the more I didn't like talking about it in that way, or it doesn't make, I mean, it's something that is like historically legitimate. But kind of expanding that. I talk about, I would say like I used to talk about the work in that way, and I try to talk about it less in that way now, because I don't think that that's that making textiles, saying that I'm using textiles and making that exclusive to women is the right way to talk about it, or really what I'm thinking about as much. It's as opposed to kind of like quiet and meditative ways to express myself, or for someone to express themselves, being what's conditioned of certain people, or what I felt like was conditioned to me. I don't know, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I think maybe I touched on what your question was.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you. So, so I think, unless you have questions for each other, I think we might wrap up, but I leave it open to the floor.
I would just like to say I'm inspired in different ways by each of the artists that's here. Ashley, with how she used the texture and then she layers the texture, and then Gunnar with the size of the drawings that he do and how he's able to incorporate so much into what he does with the detail, and to put a certain amount of passion behind the medium that he's using. And then with Nayana, it's the incredible message that's with it, and also the speed that you're able to work with. I like how quickly you are able to complete such powerful pieces.
I was thinking about Charles, your work, and something that I thought was really interesting. I have such a hard time writing. So first of all, that you're a writer and a painter and an artist is like very cool to me. But something that I thought was really neat was being able to see how you made paintings of the characters in your book, right? If I understand
Yes.
correctly. Because I feel like usually when you're like reading a book that someone else has written, obviously, it's like they must have some idea of who their characters are and what they look like and who they are, and then the reader has an idea. And then if you see like a book that's made into a movie, you have another idea that's like kind of given to you. So I thought that was really neat, or like if it was just really interesting in that you were able to see so much more from the author when you're able to kind of see what your version of your characters is.
Yeah, thank you. As I was writing, I was just compelled to do a visual on how I imagine her to look based on her character.
Yes, I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, I'm just really glad to be included, and I've learned a lot, and I also feel very inspired, especially Ashley, you're making me want to go back into some of my textile stuff. So just that the tactileness of it is appealing. I'm really glad that I got to hear from all of you today and be included. So thank you.
Yeah.
Likewise, I'm honored to be included in this group. So I appreciate all of your thoughts and seeing behind the curtain a little bit into your practice. And thank you, Joanna, as well, for hosting this for us tonight.
Well, thank you. It was it was a time well spent, and I really appreciate all of you and all of your work. And I do invite everyone who can to come see the show. We also have the images online. We have images of the artwork as installed. And we'd love to have you visit virtually or in person. So thank you very much. And we will sign off for the evening.